Hello and welcome to the world of Duke Ellington's piano. Duke Ellington had a birthday yesterday. He was born in 1899. So are you kids there? Do the math, figure out how old he would be. Give you a hint.
Well,
The numbers 1, 2, and 1. He would be 121 today. Yesterday, actually. Yesterday was his birthday. So, of course, I love everything about Duke Ellington. His whole world, his composing, his arranging, his recordings. But I'd like to focus a little bit on an aspect that isn't always addressed, his piano playing. Because I think he's one of the great jazz pianists of all time. Of course, playing with his band, you don't always hear as much piano. And he would always refer to himself as the piano player. Sit down, play an intro, and then kick off the band. But so the piece I started with is my prelude. It's called Prelude to a Kiss by Duke Ellington. So that might be a good way to get started. And so I'd like to go back and I'd like to talk a little bit about his influences as a young man, and then skip ahead and talk about some of the people that were influenced by him later on. So he was born in 1899, Washington, D.C., grew up there. He started piano lessons. His piano teacher had a wonderful name for a piano teacher, Mrs. Marietta Clinkscales. That was her actual name. With a name like that, I think you have to be a piano teacher, or maybe don't go near a piano. I'm not sure which. So he grew up, he took lessons. At the first part of lessons, he wasn't that into it, like a lot of kids I know, and he preferred to play baseball to practice. But he started listening to ragtime at that era, 1910, 1915. Ragtime was the big piano music, kind of a precursor of jazz. And he started working in a soda fountain as a soda jerk. And he wrote his first piece at the age of 15. It's called Soda Fountain Rag. And I'm going to attempt it here. First composition. He tried to play it. He played a concert at the Whitney Museum in 1960s, and he said, "This is my song I first wrote." He got to the bridge, and he stopped playing. He said, "This is a little too hard. Things ain't what they used to be." But anyway, it's a great piece. Let's see. Going forward, he wrote the Soda Fountain Rag. Then he started hanging out in Frank Holliday's pool room in Washington, D.C., near the Howard Theater, the historic district, and met all kinds of people in his pool room. There's a piano, kind of like mine, in the back room, nice old upright, and a A lot of pianists would come through and people from all over the world. He heard a pianist named Harvey Brooks, who inspired him to get back into the piano. He studied with him and a few other people. But then comes his first really big influence, and that is James P. Johnson. And I'd like to share Duke Ellington's words about James P. Johnson, because he had a great way with words. So James P. Johnson. My first encounter with James was through the piano rolls. Percy Johnson, a drummer in Washington, told me about them, took me home with him, and played me Carolina Shout. He said I ought to learn it. So how was I going to do it? I wanted to know. He showed me the way. We slowed the machine, and then I could follow the keys going down. I learned it. And how I learned it. I nursed it, rehearsed it. Yes, this was the most solid foundation for me. I got hold of some of his other roles, and they helped with styling, but Carolina Shout became my party piece. Then James came to Washington to play Convention Hall. It holds maybe 4,000 or 5,000 people. I was always a terrific listener. I'm taller on one side than the other from leaning over the piano, listening. This time I listened all night. After a while, my local following started agitating. You get up there and play that piece, they said. Go on, get up there and cut him. So, I had to get up there and play it. Hey, you played that good, James said. We were friends then, and I wanted the privilege of showing him around town, showing him the spots, introducing him to my pals, the best bootleggers and so on. That naturally means more leaning on the piano. Afterwards, we were fast friends, and James never forgot. So there in that atmosphere, I became one of the close disciples of the James P. Johnson style. I'm going to play an excerpt from Carolina Shouts. It goes on, but I'm going to stop there. Carolina Shout by James P. Johnson. So after that foundation, he was ready to move to New York. So he came to New York, came up to Harlem, where there was a great school of piano players called the Harlem Stride School. James P. was a part of it. A lot of great players, but one who influenced him exceptionally was Willie the Lion Smith. So again, I'm going to read from Duke's writing. This is from his Music is My Mistress autobiography. The Lion, Willie the Lion Smith. What a wealth of subject tingle. Would that I were sufficiently prolific to expound on the endless excitement and adventure of my first meeting and total exposure to this melodic harmonic kaleidoscope. So his first impression of the Lion. He went to meet him in a club in Harlem. Everything and everybody seemed to be doing whatever they were doing in tempo the Lion's group was laying down. The walls and furniture seemed to lean understandingly. One of the strangest and greatest sensations I ever had. The waiters served in that tempo. Everybody who had to walk in, out, or around the place walked with a beat. I'll play a little bit of Willie the Lion Smith's composition, Relaxing. Willie the Lion, relaxing. This is Duke Ellington again. The Lion has been the greatest influence on most of the great piano players who have been exposed to his fire, his harmonic lavishness, his stride. Fats Waller, James P. Johnson, Count Basie, Donald Lambert, Joe Turner, Sam Furness, and of course I swam in it. Most of it still clings agreeably. Even the great Art Tatum, as great as he was, and I know he was the greatest, showed strong patterns of Willie Smithisms after being exposed to the Lion. I love him. He is wonderful. I can't think of anything good enough to say about the Lion. Willie the Lion Smith. So that's part one. Those are some of the influences on Duke Ellington's piano playing. And of course, his composition too, as we shall see. So he's in New York in the 20s. He gets a gig at the Cotton Club. The band starts playing on the radio, becomes famous. He's recording, writing all these great tunes. So I want to play an interlude that's going to cover about 20 years of that happening. And it's a piece he wrote in 1934, In My Solitude. Okay. Billy Strayhorn. Billy Strayhorn joined the band in 1939. Originally, he was going to write lyrics, but of course his talents were far too great for that. He became a close writing partner and arranging partner of Duke Ellington. They worked together very tightly in composing, and sometimes you wouldn't know who was writing the music. Duke had a great story later in his life. He said they were writing a piece for one of the sacred concerts, and it was a six syllables they had to set. And he asked Strayhorn to do it. Strayhorn was in Paris, I think, and Duke was in New York. They both wrote separately. He said they came up with a phrase that was almost identical. Maybe one or two notes were different, but same phrase, same shape, ended on the same note. So they were very close. And they played piano together. It's a good picture I have up there. Played a lot of four-hand music. And Billy Strayhorn was quite a pianist in his own right, and often he would be on playing Duke's recordings, especially in the smaller group recordings. One of the games, sometimes a game to hear who wrote what. It's also a game who was playing piano sometimes. So Strayhorn could emulate Duke very well, but he also had his own style. He, of course, is famous for writing this famous tune. You all know that one. So, but he wrote so many great pieces. I want to do one of his pieces of blues. It's called Intimacy of the Blues. Blues are always central to Duke Ellington's music. Okay, Billy Strayhorn. Can't say enough words about Billy Strayhorn. Duke really loved Billy Strayhorn. Thelonious Monk. I don't know, maybe there aren't too many pianists who would look at it and say, oh, they're influenced by Duke Ellington. But I think you can definitely say Thelonious Monk was. There's a story, maybe true, maybe not. Duke Ellington's band was on the road, as it always was. And one of his band members had a portable record player and was playing one of Monk's earliest records, probably in the 40s. Duke walked by, the door was open, he listened for a minute, said, who's that? He said, oh, it's Thelonious Monk. He said, oh, he's stealing my stuff. And it's, of course, a compliment. Then in 1962, Newport Jazz Festival, Duke Ellington actually invited Thelonious Monk to play with the band. Billy Strayhorn had a piece called Frere Monk, and Billy Strayhorn arranged Monk's Dream, a Thelonious Monk composition, which Monk played with the Ellington band. So I'm going to play Monk's Dream. That was two tunes together, Thelonious Monk's Rhythm-a-Ning and Duke Ellington's Cottontail, based on the tune chord changes of I Got Rhythm. Duke Ellington had a great metaphor for jazz. He said he thought of jazz as a tree with many branches, and the twigs at the end reached out and take in any influence from anywhere, north, south, east, west, and then you had the trunk going down and the roots going deep down into Africa. But it's such a nice image because it leaves space for everything. Makes me think of New Orleans pianist Jerry Roll Morton, who was not influenced by Duke, and Duke was not influenced by him. But I think a common concept they had was that the various influences and branches of jazz. Jerry Roll Morton had a phrase called the Spanish tinge to refer to the Caribbean, Latin American influences in jazz, which are a very important part of jazz. So I'm going to play a composition of Duke Ellington called Purple Gazelle from an album called Afro Bossa, but I'm going to play it in kind of a Jelly Roll New Orleans Spanish tinge style. We'll try it anyway. So that sums up a lot of influences. There's a couple people I'm going to mention. I'm not going to play any of their music. People that were influenced by Duke is Randy Weston, great pianist and composer who moved to Africa, wrote a lot of music using African rhythms. He always spoke about Duke Ellington as what his main influence. Another might be surprising is Cecil Taylor, who is an avant-garde jazz pianist, but he also lists Duke Ellington as his biggest influence. And in his way, it's not about the harmonies or the tunes or the melodies, but Duke Ellington's thinking of his orchestral approach to the piano. That's how he put it, was a big influence on Cecil Taylor. And lots of others. But like I say, he's not widely discussed as one of the influential pianists, but I think that's wrong. So I'm straightening that out today. Okay, I'd like to do one more piece, and then I think we're going to have some questions and hopefully some answers. This last piece is a solo piano piece from the Queen's Suite. It's called The Single Petal of a Rose. All right, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure playing for you out there. It's great to see your faces. And so I want to thank Third Street for bringing us together as a community. It's very special that we can do this. So thank you.
Thank you, Neil. We have some time for some question and answers, and we already have a few pre-submitted questions that we're going to ask. However, if you all here have some questions you'd like to ask Neil, then you can jump down to the chat box and type in some questions. And while you're doing that, maybe let us know where you're coming from and if you play an instrument or what you do. So one question, Neil. Oh, sorry. Of course, as soon as I did it, I closed the application. From Brandon in Manhattan, what's your favorite Ellington composition?
Well, Brandon in Manhattan, that's a very good question. But I'm going to use a cop-out that Duke Ellington used. When they asked him what his favorite piece was, he always said it was the next one he's writing. So I'll just say, it's the next one I'm going to play. How's that for a cop-out?
I'm right there with you. We have a question here from Alex, who said, how has Duke Ellington influenced you as a composer and a pianist?
Alex, good question. Alex is also a composer and pianist. I would say a lot of what Cecil Taylor said. I think the idea of the piano, thinking orchestrally on the piano, which of course is not unique to jazz, classical musicians, pianists all the time are thinking, how does that translate? Could this be the, trying to get an orchestral sound on the piano. Also as a pianist, I think I love his tone. He's very incisive. Feels like he means every note that he plays. As a composer, I think probably more than anything else is his sense of theater, in that there's a direction in your pieces. There's characters that interact, and I think that's very strong in his compositions.
Great. We did have one question from Eve. What's a soda fountain?
Well, a soda fountain, for those of you who want to know, it's a place where you make these drinks with carbonated water and flavorings. And used to be like a counter, maybe in a drugstore, and a teenager would go and sit and hang out. And the person behind the counter making the drinks was called a soda jerk. Don't know why that I can't answer. That's as much as I know about soda fountains.
We have one here from Timothy. Why is his original name Duke? And if not, why the title?
Good question. His original name is Edward Kennedy Ellington. And the nickname, or name they came up for Duke, I think pretty obvious if you ever see him speaking or playing. He had even as a young man, very regal manner, and people just looked up to him, and that was a term of respect.
Yeah, and speaking as a jazz musician myself, I think there is a little bit of like kind of like title, like there are some titles like Count Basie or Ella, the First Lady of Swing. I think there's a kind of a common thread there.
The Prez.
The Prez, Lester Young, exactly. So it's kind of jazz royalty. We have a question here from, oh great, now the questions are pouring in. Keep them coming, everyone. We have a question from Fiore from Stuytown. Hi, Fiore. How did Duke's piano playing influence his writing style and composition for his bands?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think it was essential to his composing for orchestra, especially at the beginning, because when he started out, he even said himself, he hadn't really studied composition in the academic sense, let's put it that way. He started his band, maybe I think he had 6 or 7 people to start, the Washingtonians. He would play the chords on his piano and take the notes and say, this is going to be the saxophone, this will be the trombone. And then once he got the players, he learned what the players could do and then grew from there. And then eventually he started writing more specifically for his musicians in the band. But I think it was very important to him at the beginning. This is why I wanted to play and talk about his influences, because I think that was a huge part of his composing style too.
Yeah. And keeping it related to his compositional technique from Ben Lanzi, is it true that Duke didn't write out his big band arrangements and just gave his players lines to memorize? Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, you mean like scores? Is it? Ben, I can see you. You mean like scores? Or...
Oh, yeah, scores.
I don't think he wrote out full scores. For one thing, he didn't have time. He wrote so much music. He was on the road. He might have a premiere coming up or a recording session. So he did a kind of a shorthand, and he had a copyist named Tom Whaley who knew his music really well. Evidently had lots of tricks he could do. He might write out a 5-note voicing for the saxophones, and then he could give them various rhythms to play. So it's not like set, every note, but definitely it was added up here for sure.
We have a question from Maite and Tristan and Javier and Sebastian, some of Neal's students. And they asked, because we have been talking a lot about early Duke and his influences, but they were wondering if you could speak to Ellington's later works, like the Sacred Concerts, and if those differed from his earlier writing.
Wow, that's a very good question. I'll go do some research and come back on that.
It's for the that's for the next virtual series.
Yeah, he certainly developed his style. I mean, as he said, as a young man, he was a great listener, and he never stopped listening. So in all his travels around the world, he listened. They wrote suites, the Far East Suite, the New Orleans Suite, the Latin American Suite, he and Strayhorn together. The sacred concerts were very important to him. He wrote three sacred concerts. How did his style change then? I think you can say he drew on all his experiences. As he got older, he had more experiences to draw on. I'd say that's my answer.
And again, we only have just a few more minutes, folks. So if you have any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Another question, Angela asks if there are any particular pianists playing Ellington today that you would recommend listening to.
I was thinking about that, and one person I was looking at different versions, Aaron Deal. I saw him playing Single Pedal Rose. Right off the hand, I can't think of others, but I'm, obviously they're out there. Tommy Flanagan used to play some wonderful Ellington. He's not alive now. I'll get back to you then, Angela. I'll do some research on that
one. Danny asks, sorry, the chat window is really fighting with me. Because Ellington did not write out the music or compositions, did some of the music evolve from the talent of his band? And as a saxophonist myself, I mean, he had some really remarkable musicians just in his front row.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Part of his genius was, yes, he used the talents of those great musicians. Johnny Hodges, for example. Sometimes he'd take themes that they came up with and fashion them into compositions. Sometimes not to the satisfaction of the people he took the themes from, financially anyway. But he gave credit to everybody. Yes, he got a lot from, especially at the beginning, like Bubba Miley, Tricky Sam Nan had his incredible sounds, and he really talked about tonal characteristics a lot. So it wasn't just the notes, but it was the way they played notes and the way notes would sound when they're combined, like a plunger mute with a clarinet and a muted trumpet.
Yeah, he had such musical personalities in his groups, kind of a large canvas that he could use. Well, that about brings it. I'm gonna pull another question on you, Neal, because a lot of people are asking which of Ellington's songs Which one's your favorite? I think they want to know.
Ah, okay. Well, I do love Single Petal of the Rose.
Yep.
Um, I like pretty much every piece in Money Jungle, one of his great piano albums. Not so much the composition, but the way that.
Yeah. And for those of you who were coming in earlier as we had music on, that was a track from Money Jungle. Mhm.
But like I say, there's so many. But I can make a list for you.
And we'll put them up online at virtual3rdstreet.org. So I think we're running kind of towards the end of the program. Neal, do you have a short piece or something you'd like to take us out to?
Well, sure.
There's always blues.
There's blue, but I'm feeling very happy about all this. So Duke Ellington wrote a song called "I Let a Song Go Out of My Heart."
Wonderful, beautiful. Thank you, Neal. And again, how about another round of silent jazz hands for Neal Kirkwood, Third Street faculty member. And again, thank you for joining us today for the World of Duke Ellington. We, as part of our virtual community series, we have events throughout the week, and we invite you to frequently check our website, www.virtual3rdstreet.org, for all the latest offerings as the weeks begin. And of course, we invite you to our 125th virtual gala on Wednesday, May 6th at 6:30. And you can get more information about the gala link at the website as well, virtual3rdstreet.org. So again, from all of us here at Third Street, take care, listen to great music, and we'll see you next time. Have a good night.
All these- I got a bunch of
Thanks, Neal.